Okay, those are some big words. We're going to define those in a little bit here. The scope of tonight's program, what we're going to be talking about applies to new or established residential landscapes with a focus on perennial trees and shrubs. We're not going to be covering anything about vegetable gardening, if you have large acreage, or any farming. Okay, and I want to emphasize farming here because a lot of research and information that you can hear about gardening actually pertains to farming. And the goal there is always to maximize crops, which are mainly annual crops. So most farming methods would not be applicable to sustainable landscaping. So here are a few definitions of sustainable landscaping. The first one from Webster's is landscape practices that involve the use of sustainable practices. Well, that's pretty obvious. Wikipedia says it's a type of gardening or landscaping that takes the environmental issues of sustainability into account. Greenscape.com says this is numerous practices that address environmental issues related to design, construction, and maintenance of landscapes. So that's getting a little more information. Colorado State says this is landscaping that includes an attractive environment that's in balance with the local environment and requires little resource inputs. Emily Schroer of Dumpsters Blogger says it beautifies your home while letting nature do the heavy lifting. So these are all just some little plethora of definitions that we can look at and then make up our own definition. So sustainable landscape benefits. What we want out of a landscape is hopefully lower maintenance and less work. Some of the practices I'm going to show you tonight hopefully will result in lower maintenance and less work. Hopefully these practices will also be more cost effective. The sustainable landscape benefits always will conserve water. They're always going to provide a habitat for wildlife, including birds and beneficial insects. And then we're going to protect the environment off your property, which includes the streams, wetlands, and rivers. Those are always benefits of sustainable landscaping. So the goals of sustainable landscaping, and this is basically going to be the outline of my presentation. Plants. We want to maximize the success and survival of your plants through proper soil management, plant selection, planting techniques, and aftercare. This is going to be the bulk of my presentation, this very first goal. Second goal is going to be to minimize weeds and weeding. The third goal is going to be pertains to water, and we want to use as little water as possible, yet assure the survival of our plants. The fourth goal, fertilizer. We want to grow healthy plants while adding little or no fertilizers. We want to, once again, we want to save money. The fifth goal, pesticides. We want to minimize pests and apply little or no pesticides. And when I talk about pesticides, what I'm talking about are insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, and bactericides. And then the last goal is we want to learn to tolerate slight imperfections in our landscape, yet still have a beautiful landscape, okay? So these goals are setting the outline for this course. We're going to discuss each of these, and like I said, we're going to spend the most time on the first goal. So, soil test. Do we need a soil test? As we're talking about maximizing the success of the plants, typically you're not going to need a soil test, okay, because you're not going to usually need any added nutrients. If you think your soil might be lacking a particular nutrient, then it is a good idea to have your soil tested first before you start adding things. If you do a soil test, you might be surprised to find that your soil is not lacking nutrients, but it actually might have excess nutrients, okay? There is a site here, which at the end of this presentation will be a page with all the links that you need. And this is a website where you can learn how to do a soil test. Gives you all the instructions. That's great. Like I said, the last slide in this presentation has a link to everything that's going to be shown in this presentation. So you don't need to write that down real quick. All right. So step 2, if we don't need a soil test, we can just skip step 1. Step 2 is going to be plant selection for that location. We need to consider the following when we choose a plant and make sure that it's going to thrive in that location. First thing is sun exposure. Does it get a lot of sun, or is it partial sun, or is it shady? Drainage. Does water run through it, or does water set there? Wind exposure. And then the size of the plant at maturity. You don't want to plant a large plant that's not in a small space, okay? You're going to run into so much trouble that way. Now, if you hear yourself say, well, it should be okay, or, oh, let's just try it there, then you probably want to change your plant choice, okay? As far as trees go, we do want to plant trees as much as we can, and we'll be talking about this later in the presentation. Friends of Trees up here in the Pacific Northwest may be in your area, and they will plant a tree for you. So they'll dig the hole, they'll get it in there, they will help you maintain it for the first year, okay? And it's a really great way of getting more trees around in our areas. That link will also be listed in the final slide of my show. A good plant resource guide is Gardening in the Pacific Northwest by Bonin and Campion. And I have that book here, if you look here. What I love about this book, as far as plant selection, is it has lots of pictures, which I love. And it lists every type, like all these different types of plants, and then where they would need to be, a picture of the plant. So it's a really good, if you don't know what to plant, that's a really good resource. Now, here I have some plants that were put in the wrong location. Right over here on the left, this is a rose bush that was planted in the shade. And as you can see, that's not doing very well. Here in the center, we have a wind-damaged Japanese maple seedling, and that's not growing like it should. And then we have here a rhododendron that's planted in full sun. And so these leaves are all sunburned here. So these are some things that would happen when you put a plant not quite in the right place. Now, step 3 is plant specimen selection. So how to choose the right, once you've decided on the plant, which plant do you choose, okay? The best chance for success is with a bare root specimen, but unfortunately, those are not always available. When they are, that's going to be your best chance for success. Second best chance for success would be a burlap root wrap, and then third would be a container. And this is pretty much what we usually find our plants in when we go to the nursery. When you're planting for success, you want to consider your specimen an investment, okay? So I recommend highly that you purchase your plants from a reputable local nursery that specifically deals with plants and who specializes in plants for your area. They are very, very knowledgeable, and so that's a really good resource also, is your local nursery. Let's talk about native species. There's a lot of talk about how you should always plant natives and only natives, okay? Because those are going to be the ones that will be the only ones that will thrive. So we can plant native species when it's possible. It is a good idea, but we don't want to be obsessed with planting only native species. And the reason is because our urban environment, which is where our house is and our landscape is different from the natural environment. We have topsoils that get imported in. We have way more sunlight because all the trees have been cleared. We have more air pollution because we're in an urban environment. We have more opportunistic pests brought in. We have drier soils, we have hotter soils, we have saltier soils, and we have compacted soils. So what might be great as far as a native species out in the wild may not even survive in your landscape. Okay, so don't be obsessed with natives. Plant when you can, natives, but don't be obsessed with that. Instead, what I'd like you to be obsessed with is plant diversity, okay, and vertical structure. So rather than planting like the same thing everywhere, diversify your planting choices. Plant a variety of different plants, and then vertical structure. Be obsessed with vertical structure. We want to have as many layers to our garden as we can. A canopy of large trees, lower trees. We want to have a shrub layer, an herbaceous layer, which is kind of like the little plants around the ground. We want to have ground covers, and then we can go from there. So these two gardens over here on the right are good examples of gardens that have distinct layers, okay? Okay, step 4 is planting. So we've gone through, do we need a soil test? Maybe not. Skip step 1. Step 2, we want to see right place, right plant. Step 3 is your plant choice. And then step 4, now we've got the plant and we're going to plant it. The first thing I want to show you in this diagram, this diagram to the left here, I guess the center here, it's used as an educational tool to demonstrate root growth in order to protect trees during construction. So knowing that the tree roots naturally grow shallow down here is of value during the planting step, okay? People think that tree roots grow like this one here. That's not always correct. They grow like this, where it's across and it's beyond the canopy of the tree. The diagram on the right identifies the root collar down here, okay? And what you need to know, very important on that, is that a root collar must be planted above ground. These diagrams also show the proper taper of the trunk. It gets smaller as you go up and larger as you go down here, with the flare at the bottom right where the root collar begins. So these are some terms that you're going to want to become familiar with if you're going to be planting larger bushes and trees. So let's go through a little scenario here. We have all done this in the past. Some of us more recently than others, like last week. So we dig a deep hole and we add organic matter and soil amendments and transplant supplements. We place the plant with the roots and all the potting medium all stuck together in the shape of the pot right into the hole, and we bury it deep. We immediately trim off lots of leaves and branches to get the look we want, and then we stake the plant tightly so it's not going to sway. Okay, the problem with that method, which is an outdated method, is that digging the deep hole, first of all, it's a lot of work and it's not necessary. Remember, we said here, the tree roots don't grow deep, they grow across and more shallow, okay? Adding organic matter is going to cause soil subsidence, which means sinking. So that organic matter breaks down and causes a hole where you planted. Adding soil amendments are not necessary unless the soil lacks a particular nutrient as per the soil test. And then adding transplant supplements is just not necessary and is a waste of money. Planting the roots in the shape of a pot can result in the roots not being able to establish. They're not getting oxygen, which is what they need. Continuing those issues, planting potting medium is not adding soil, and so potting medium is not a good soil additive. Burying the roots deep results in low oxygen to those roots, and they can't establish. I think I pretty much covered that one earlier. Burying the root collar results in the root stock taking over and results in suckers. This is the picture right over here. These are called suckers. Trimming off healthy leaves and branches results in the plant's energy now being diverted to healing the cuts and reestablishing those leaves and branches rather than establishing roots, which is what you want a plant to do when you first transplant it. And then staking the plant tightly is not going to allow the plant to sway naturally and develop that taper at the base. We said we needed that taper, if you recall. You're still going to find a lot of sources that tell you that this is the best way to plant your trees. But the following is another method that has been shown scientifically to work better, okay? So I'm going to show you a video. I'm going to get out of this presentation real quick and show you a 4-minute video. If the video turns out to be a bit choppy for you, then it'd probably be a good time to go get a drink or something. Now, I'll give you the link to the video in your email that you get at the end of the presentation, and you can go check that out at the end at your leisure after the presentation. So I'm going to just escape out of here. I'm actually going to stop share for a second and go and reshare so I can optimize my video. And here we go. I'm just going to hit play here. So today I'm going to show you how to plant a plant that is in a pot, which is going to be typically how you buy them. This is a blue spruce, and it says here it needs full sun, and it grows 50 feet. So Erica, just want to verify you can hear that?
Yes, we can.
Here you go. So wherever you put this, you need a lot of space, basically. Okay, so we talked about not trimming anything unless it's diseased or damaged. So I'm going to show you in here. This one here is damaged. You can see that it's broken. So I'm going to just clip that all the way to the base. And I have sanitized my tools using rubbing alcohol. And then this one is dead. So I'm going to trim that one back. Now you'll be super tempted to trim this branch here that's sticking out and doesn't look like it fits and it's not very pretty, but do not do that. That would stress the plant out too much. Okay? So we've trimmed back everything we're going to trim back. And now I'm going to remove the tree from the pot. And I'm going to remove all of the potting medium. Now this just came from the nursery, and so a lot of the potting medium just fell away. It was actually probably recently transplanted into this. I didn't know that, you're not going to know that, so that's how that goes. Okay, so welcome back. I have removed all the potting medium, and that does take a lot of work. I won't be shy about that. It takes a lot of kind of digging and tweezing and pulling, and you may even have to get it wet and things like that. So, but I finally did it, and almost all of the potting medium, there's a teeny bit left in the center that's just not going to budge, so I'm just going to be fine with that. Now I'm going to take this, and if this were growing naturally, it would create spokes like this, okay? It would be spoking out, which is the shape that I'm now trying to give it when I plant it. Now I do have one root here that is going downward and is not conforming to this spoke shape that I want. So I'm actually going to trim that one. So I'm going to take my clean clippers again, and it's this big one here that just is, it's not going to go out to the side. So I'm just going to take that and cut it just like that. And that's okay. The plant will be fine. I'm going to tease that one out, and then I'm going to take all the rest of the roots and pull them out into a spoke. That way I can get my measurement of the hole that I need to dig. And if I had done the regular method, which was dig a hole about 6 inches deeper than your pot and a foot wider than your pot, I would have had to dig a hole that was a foot deep and probably 2 feet wide, okay? And then it sometimes says till the soil at the bottom. We're not going to do any of that. we're going to simply dig a shallow hole that's basically going to be in the shape of a bike tire turned on its side, okay? So we're going to spoke all these out, and then I can measure how big my hole is going to be. I mean, you can eyeball it. You don't need to take the yardstick or measure, but I know that that's going to be about 2.5 feet round, right? So in diameter, and only 6 inches tall, okay? And the height, if I could get a close-up in here, is going to be right to here. This is my root flare. The soil needs to go right to the top of the root flare. Do not plant this plant taller, deeper than that root flare right there. You want this taper at the base, the flare out, and the top of the soil is going to go right there to the top of where the first roots start out. All right, so I'll go dig my hole and plant this, and in a few years, I don't know how many years, I should have a 30 to 50 foot tree. So thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop that share. Now I'm going to go back and share the other one. Take that off. Back to my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, hopefully that worked out for you. If it didn't, I can show you real quick kind of the steps that we went through.
It was very clear.
Okay, great. Yay, it worked. Okay, good. So yeah, so first step, make sure you're planting in the right place. Trim off just very little bit of what's dead or broken, and then undo it and take off all that potting medium so that you get roots. Put them in the shape of a spoke. Make sure you don't plant it too deep. Go dig your hole. And here are your steps. For step 1, remove the potting medium, then tease the roots out to the shape of a spoke. Cut any roots that don't conform to the shape of that spoke. So if they're pointing downward, dig a wide hole in the diameter of the roots at a depth that will just cover that root flare. Place the plant in the hole and spread the roots into the shape of a spoke, and then backfill with native soil. Okay. Once you've done that, the only other things you might need to do would be maybe to stake low. If you have a very tall tree, you're probably going to have to stake it low and loose if necessary, but those stakes need to be removed within 3 months. Those roots should have established by then. You want to be sure you water thoroughly and frequently until that plant or tree is established. Add a layer of mulch, but make sure it's done in the shape of a donut like this picture here, okay? Do not cover that root collar, very important. And then an example of a nutritious mulch would be to use composted leaves. If not, you can use composted manures. If you want, you can use arborist wood chips, but they, of course, would provide less nutrients than the composted manures or the nutritious mulch. And then there's another link from getchipdrop.com. Say that 10 times really fast. And once again, that link will be at the end of the presentation. That's a free chip drop service, but make sure you really want that many chips dropped before you sign up. Okay, so that's how we plant. So let's say a few years go by and we know the roots are established, the plant is flourishing as we hope, right? Now we're going to talk about pruning. Yeah, okay, step 5, pruning. There are basically entire courses taught just on pruning, okay? So, but here there's, There's going to be exceptions to every rule, but here are some of the basics, okay? Proper pruning is going to create an aesthetic landscape, and over time will reduce the need for chronic maintenance. The timing, you always want to prune dead, damaged, or diseased branches. Those always need to come off. We always want to also prune suckers and sprouts. So in this picture here, you can see these suckers are coming out. This is something that should not be happening, and they need to be trimmed away. We want to resist pruning deciduous plants. Those are plants that drop their leaves in the late summer, okay? So unfortunately, that's when they're really largest and driving you crazy, but that's the worst time that you can prune them. Make sure you always keep your tools sharp and disinfected, and then only prune 25% per year. If you prune more than that, you're going to stress that plant out. So pruning is a long process, might take years to get the look you want. So with step 5, first thing we're going to talk about is pruning shrubs. Now, shrub pruning is very specific to the species of plant and specific to the look that you're trying to achieve, okay? I have, for example, a azalea bush that is kind of a natural looking azalea bush, and then I have, you know, later at a different place in my landscape, I have an azalea hedge, okay? Well, those are pruned completely differently, even though it's the same exact plant. For your plant, I do recommend researching for each type of plant, you know, whether it's deciduous or evergreen. If the flowers set in the fall or if they set in the spring, the pruning is going to be always different, the timing especially. So here's a diagram I want you to look at. This would be a correct way of pruning a shrub. This is the before, and you would imagine it's all wiggly and crazy. And afterwards, this is what we're going to see. An improper cut would be coming at it just from the top and just going whack, because what it's going to result in is lots of little growth right at the top at each branch that you trimmed. So this says incorrect. However, if you're looking for a hedge, this is actually correct. So this is why I'm saying there's always an exception to every rule. Now, this is what we call, here's some methods of pruning for shrubs, and this is only for shrubs. This would be like a before and after of a thinning prune. This is how we're going to thin things out. This is going to be shearing. So if we want a hedge look, okay, this is what we're going to end up doing for a hedge. This is a renewal type of pruning, and the first year we just trim a couple back, things grow in. The second year we trim a little more, and the third year we end up with all new stuff. So like I had said, we only want to prune back the 25%. So a renewal pruning should take a few years. But then we have rejuvenation pruning, okay? So you might recognize rejuvenation pruning because it's commonly done for roses and hydrangea, okay? Other species that do respond well to rejuvenation pruning include hardy fuchsia, forsythia, honeysuckle, and spirea. Rejuvenation pruning should be done in the late winter and early spring, okay? So like I said, you can see with shrubs, there's an exception to every rule, and it's very species dependent and also dependent on what you want. So now we're going to talk about trees, and basically, yes, things do grow similarly, but for trees, it's going to be completely different than pruning shrubs. We don't want a hedge out of a tree, basically. So many of the cuts that are done for shrub pruning are not recommended for trees. So physiologically speaking, fall is the best time for most pruning because there's less disease around because it's cooler. You're going to have less sprouts happen because of your pruning. You can see better, so you can see the branches. You're not going to get any wildlife, in other words, bird disturbance, and you're going to get good spring growth. All right. With the tree pruning, there should be a reason for every cut. If a branch is rubbing, then we need to take care of that. If they're broken, if they're diseased, right? If you need clearance, then those are the reasons for cutting and pruning. It's always recommended that you hire an ISA certified arborist if you're going to have mature trees be pruned. Over here on the right, we have what's called a 3-cut method. Once again, if it's a very large mature tree, you're not going to be doing this. Your ISA certified arborist is going to be doing this. But they're going to be doing the first cut, second cut, and then the third cut. All right, that's so that this branch doesn't just break off and cause really bad damage for the tree. For small branches, you're going to just cut this, and I have a diagram of that on the next slide right here. So this is the correct type of cut. Let's just say that this is a pretty small branch, maybe 2 inches in diameter. And then this one is here this is like 3 inches, and this is like a 1-inch diameter branch. This is the cut that you're going to do. It's a minimal stump. There's not going to be any bark damage. You cut it at an angle, right? So that, and then the tree's just going to be able to wound over that. What we don't want to do is cut it right along the main branch, okay, because it exposes too much surface area and it's going to be more prone to disease. We definitely do not want to do what's called a stub cut, and that's where we leave so much here. What's going to end up with a stub cut is you're going to get growth behind this, okay? So flush cuts, stub cuts, heading cuts, this is a heading cut, also known as topping. They're very detrimental to the tree, and they would cause a lot of growth and damage, and it's not sustainable. Now, here I have you ever noticed, I always thought this was funny, have you ever noticed that trees seem to grow toward electrical power lines? Well, it's actually, they don't grow toward electrical power lines. What happens is the owner of the tree shears off branches, and as I described in this here, that's basically shearing off, and you're going to get excess growth behind that shearing cut that's going to now grow vigorously toward the electrical power line. It's exactly the opposite of what you were trying to achieve in that scenario. Okay, shearing is just essentially a bunch of stub cuts, and you're going to get a tremendous amount of growth behind it. So here's a stub cut, and as you can see, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, looks like 5 more new branches that are coming out behind it. If this had been cut back as it should have been, you wouldn't have gotten this growth. All right. So here's some reasons. The flush cuts are very difficult for the tree to heal, and it leaves it open for the pests. All right. Stub cuts, as I described, promote the vigorous growth behind the cut. It causes a leaf out, and then this new foliage or leaf out is actually very prone to pests and disease. Heading cuts result in the tree's inability to survive the cuts, and if it even does survive, the tree is way more prone to disease, so eventually it won't survive. Okay. We are now on to the second goal. I told you most of the presentation would be about the first goal, which is the plant, making sure your plants succeed. Weeding. First 2 bullets talk about lawn, okay? Weeding in a lawn, if you keep your lawn a little shaggy, like 2 to 3 inches, you're going to get less weeds because it's going to shade out those weeds and they're not going to be able to grow. If you do have some weeds, maybe accept a few weeds in your lawn. It's probably okay. Now, if you can't stand the weeds, just hand pick them, right? Um, and if you have weeds that are growing in your flower beds and stuff, just hand pick them. Any bare soil, however, so we've moved on from lawns, make sure bare soil is covered with compost, mulch, wood chips, cardboard, anything. Anytime you have bare soil, you are going to get weeds there. Carpet the soil with ground cover plants, right? And then plant densely so that you don't even see the soil. If you can see soil, a weed can grow there. As a last resort, you can use natural products such as horticultural vinegar, and we'll talk more on some of those products. So let's talk about what really is a weed, okay? A weed is defined as a plant that's not part of the landscape plan. I have a hydrangea bush, and I get seedlings sometimes. I don't want them there, so I'm pulling them out. But that's not really a weed by the typical sense of the word. We just need to realize the difference between an invasive weed and a nuisance weed, okay? So the following three pictures are noxious weeds that you may see in your garden, and most people consider these weeds, which is just not part of our plan. We've got the common cat's ear or the false dandelion, Canada thistle, which, as we all have learned, hurts when you pull it the wrong way, and then the perennial sow thistle. So we're all going to agree those are weeds. Now on our next slide, though, here are some invasive weeds that they're considered invasive, and you should be pulling them out in the Pacific Northwest, but they may have actually been intentionally planted there, and they're not pulled out at the same rate as these, what we might consider the ugly weeds versus maybe the prettier weeds, all right? So these weeds, your yellow toadflax, St. John's wort, butterfly bush, Japanese knotwood, Himalayan blackberry, and then English ivy, one of my least favorites. They all should be not included in a sustainable garden. Okay, so keep in mind when we're talking about weeds, the goal is always to minimize weeds, all right? We cannot eliminate weeds. We're always going to get weeds, but we can minimize them, right? Know your noxious weeds and be diligent about pulling those. When you do pull the weeds, get them before they go to seed, and then get the root. And just think back, you know, some of these weeds do provide some benefits. Dandelions actually loosen compacted soil, and clover attracts pollinators. So there are some benefits to some weeds. All right, and then I do talk a little bit more about herbicides when we get to the pesticide section. But now we're moving on to the third section, which is how to minimize water use in our sustainable gardens. I did want to pause for a second. Erica, were there any questions up to this point on those other two sections?
There have been a couple about fertilizers, and I basically just indicated that most woody plants don't need fertilizers. Did you have anything you wanted to add about that, or?
No, I'm in agreement with that. And then we have a fertilizers section coming up right after this water use section. Okay, so let's talk about water. Overwatering. This can lead to runoff, of course, which carries pollution, which is basically fertilizers, pesticides, soil, pet droppings, or wildlife droppings. Those all considered pollution, and it carries that to our nearby waterways. And then we can get algae blooms. Excess plant growth may result in a lush leafy plant, but that plant is more prone to disease and opportunistic pests because the plant puts less energy into the protective compounds. So wet leaves, because of overwatering also, are dense, right? And they may develop fungus, okay? So overwatering is never good. The first thing we can do to minimize our water use is to actually minimize our lawn size. All right, turf uses more water than any other plant. What we could do is consider grass islands rather than an expansive lawn. Okay, and here's some really good examples of how you can take out some of the lawn and you've got, you know, beds here instead. And so you don't have, you have like grass islands and then plant islands. So that's one way to cut down on water use. Now I've got some sustainable methods of how to remove your lawn. There's a long-term one called sheet mulching. You basically cut your lawn low, cover it with cardboard and wet it, cover it with 4 to 6 inches of mulch, and then you wait 6 months and then you just basically plant it. The cardboard will decompose and your mulch, everything, it'll just turn into a soil planting bed. So this is great for, especially in the Pacific Northwest, things go dormant and cold. And it's great to start that in fall, so you get the 6 months, and in the spring, you're ready to go. You know, if you didn't start this in the fall and you're in a hurry, you can try the sod and flip method, okay? You use a sod cutter to cut strips or bricks out of the sod. You cut them 8 inches deep, and then you flip it over, okay? So that the grass is now on the bottom and what you have up above is the dirt, the soil. You cover that with a fabric, a permeable fabric weed barrier, and then you're going to remove that the following year. So that first year, you're going to plant annuals, okay? Something that doesn't need a real deep root. Then the following year, you can start planting your perennials. So what I did, this is my garden, this is my yard. I started this, and this was the section of lawn I wanted to take out. It was an awkward triangle, and it was kind of uphill, hard to mow anyway, and too much drainage, so it didn't really ever stay that green. So we wanted to take that out, and we did the cover it method, and we didn't wait 6 months because I was in a hurry. So then we did the flip method, and it's now my vegetable garden. So that's that same triangle right here in the lower left picture, and this is coming at it from the other direction now. So I have corn and pumpkins and tomatoes and everything there instead. Okay, while you're designing these islands, make sure you design by grouping plants with the same water needs together, okay? Identify an indicator plant in your landscape that slightly wilts first when the soil is dry. For my garden, it happens to be the hydrangea. I basically don't need to water until I see my hydrangea start to wilt, and then I know it's time to apply some water. So in this diagram, we've got some drier areas through here, maybe some wetter areas right around this hardscape walkway, and then one section over here to the right that has more of your kind of annuals and shrubs that need more water. So you don't have to water the whole entire thing because you've mixed up all your different water need plants, okay? You just have to water one area. So that's a good idea. Regarding lawns, if you're going to keep some lawn, of course, you're probably going to want to water it. Although here in the Pacific Northwest, we've got a lot more people that are letting their lawns go dormant over the summer, the late summer, so they're not watering. But if you do want to water, just know that a lawn requires about 1 inch of water per week, and it should be at a frequency of 3 to 4 times per week. So how you want to determine how long to water, you can set a tuna can out and measure how long it takes to get a 1/4 inch of water into that can. For plants, water the soil, not the leaves, during the time of day when it's cool. And then utilize other water sources. That's always a good idea. I use my vegetable rinse bucket to make sure I water all my little potted plants. So always trying to minimize water use. Okay, and as I said before, you can let your lawn go dormant in the summer and realize that established woody plants don't need much added water. Okay, it really depends on the summer. If we get a really dry summer, then some of those established woody plants might need a little boost. But if it's a normal summer where we get some rainstorms that pass through, your established woody plants aren't really going to need anything added. Be sure and compost your grass clippings and leaves and use those as a mulch to cover your soil. And this is going to maintain soil moisture and reduce evaporation. So that's going to keep that stuff really nice and moist even through the summer. Leave the leaves on the soil. And I'm going to talk about this later when I talk about beneficial insects. Weeds do use a lot of water, so they'll outcompete the water with the plants that are nearby. So they need to be minimized and pulled. Don't wait till they bloom, even if they're pretty. All right, we're now moving on to the fertilizer section. In nature, we have to understand that in nature, do we add fertilizer to forests? No, we don't, because they can do it themselves. So in nature, leaves and other plant matter, it all decomposes and goes back into the soil, and then it's cycled through to provide all the nutrients that are necessary for the plants, right? When we remove leaves, we are removing nutrients. If you like a tidy yard, then you can gather your leaves, compost them, and then return that compost mulch back to the soil and plants. That's just the best way to do it for a sustainable garden. You can also try grass cycling. If you don't catch your grass clippings, but let them fall into the grass, the way you do that, you set your mower to 3 inches and cut it before it actually reaches 4 inches. So you're just going to cut that top inch off and just let it go right back in. If you don't like the look of this, catch the clippings, compost them, and then return those nutrients back. Okay, if you don't want to just leave the leaves. When it comes to adding additional fertilizers to your precious soil, make sure you're asking yourself why, and assure that it's necessary. All right, once again, we're going to talk about mulch magic. Adding compost rather than a nitrogen fertilizer is the most sustainable process. And we want to look at if we need additional compost because we didn't produce enough. We can add locally composted manures and shredded leaves that are added to the top of the soil. And that's going to be the best long-term maintenance as far as nutrients in our soil. Many healthy, sustainable landscapes that have mulch added to the top of the soil never need additional fertilizer. And in the first section, we just discussed, of course, maximizing the success of your plants, whereby a well-established root system will reduce the need for fertilizers. So with mulch and without mulch, the organic mulch breaks down, nutrients are released in the soil, the mulch keeps sunlight out, minimizing evaporation, right? This helps with water, which we just discussed. Without the sun, the weed seeds can't germinate. We talked about that in the weed section. It's all coming together. And then the mulch insulates plant roots, protecting them from temperature fluctuations in the environment. If we don't have mulch, that heat builds up. We get too much evaporation. We have to add water. If water is added, we can also get rain and wind, soil erosion. And we're not going to get these benefits of the nutrients in the form of fertilizer and all this other stuff. So, all right, magic mulch. So if we do want bright green plants with lots of flowers, and we just insist on adding fertilizers, just be aware that excess fertilizer or additives that release a burst of nutrients, it might result in a lush leafy plant. However, that plant is more prone to opportunistic pests and disease. Once again, that plant puts less energy into protective compounds, and it's more prone to pests. And this leaf out can delay normal dormancy cycles, okay, and then cause frost damage, which would cause damage to the plant, and it might not come back the following year. So just beware. Okay, and once again, if you insist on using fertilizers, just know that they have to be used according to their intended use. For example, lawn fertilizers do not contain phosphate. It's not legal in this state for them to contain that. So don't add a different type of fertilizer to your lawn, because you could be adding phosphates, and that's very dangerous to the environment. If you want to add a fertilizer, add it to the top of the soil. Don't apply it to the leaves, and don't till deeply into the soil. Okay, leave that soil intact. And then just know that unsustainable fertilizers include bat guano and kelps. You want to completely stay away from those. And this, as a little addition, an unsustainable soil amendment or soil conditioner is peat moss, and we don't want to use that. We're just going to try and use sustainable products in our sustainable garden. Okay. Are there any questions on fertilizers or water use?
No, there are none, Janice.
Great. All right. Pesticides, our last section. Pesticides include, and that's just a big term. People think of pest, they think bug, but that's not always the case. A pest can be a fungus, or it can be a bacteria. A pest is a weed. Okay, so pesticides include insecticides, of course, fungicides, bactericides, and herbicides. So one second. On this weed for the herbicides, what I want you to do if you want to apply an herbicide is you want to contact the Master Gardener Answer Clinic, because they have recommended formulations and method of application for the particular weed that you are trying to get rid of, okay? So let's talk about, and there's the email for them. And I'm going to talk more about that Master Gardener Answer Clinic in a second here. All right, so next we're going to talk about this disease triangle, so we can understand why pests can invade a plant, okay? In this diagram of the disease triangle, we see all three factors: a susceptible plant, the pathogen, a conducive environment, and then the pathogen present. All three of these need to be present in order to result in disease. If one of these items is removed, then the disease will not occur. And we need to just realize that most problems are not pests, but are actually problems that make the plant more susceptible to disease. Plant stress creates the opportunity for pests, so we need to determine why the plant is stressed and eliminate that opportunity, basically. Okay? So, as an example, we can have a pathogen present and a conducive environment, but if we have a plant that's not susceptible, we're not going to get the disease. Okay? We can have a pathogen present with a susceptible plant, but if we make the environment less conducive, we're not going to result in disease. So this is kind of on the forefront of what we're going to talk about later when it talks about integrative pest management. So I'd like to discuss stress, plant stress, okay? Some signs of stress include exposed roots, suckers, as we see in this picture here, leaf wilting or distortion, leaf chlorosis, as we see here, it means yellowing of the leaves, and leaf surface damage. So why are we talking about plant stress during the pesticide section? Well, the reason that most people assume that these issues are caused by an insect or a pathogen, and they want to immediately apply a pesticide. But most plant stress is caused by abiotic issues, meaning it's not a biological issue. So maybe we put a plant in a poor location, such as the rose bush that I mentioned earlier. Poor plant selection, okay? We put a plant in, but it was just not healthy from the beginning. Poor soil and management, maybe we've over-amended our soil. Over-fertilization, especially phosphorus, which is the most common over-fertilization to occur. Too much organic material that's tilled into the soil. Improper pruning. Soil compaction, so it results in poor hydration to those roots. And then poor drainage. In these pictures you can see here, this is a footpath next to a tree. This is standing water in a low point. And then here's some exposed roots here. So when we want to diagnose an issue, realize that 80% of all issues are actual cultural, meaning it's the growing conditions. Don't assume immediately that it is an insect. And what I want you all to do is inquire with Master Gardener Answer Clinic, and you just can shoot them an email and they will help you with your issue, your plant stress that's occurring. The Answer Clinic is going to guide you with the best approach for diagnosing and treating your plant stress. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about integrated pest management. It's a sustainable, which is what we're talking about today, science-based, step-by-step approach that combines cultural, mechanical, biological, and chemical tools in that order to identify, manage, not eliminate, and reduce the risk from pests in a way that reduces economic, health, and environmental risks, okay? So here's a triangle, how much energy we should be putting into pest management. Prevention, number one. Then we look to cultural and sanitation. Then we look at maybe some mechanical and physical methods. Then we look at biological methods, and as a last resort, we turn to chemical. We need to first recognize that the goal is to manage pests. Like I said before, that's insects, fungi, and bacteria, and not to control or eliminate them. If you're going to be a sustainable gardener, you will need to tolerate some damage to reap the benefits of the pollinators. Even organic pesticide can still be harmful in a sustainable landscape. For example, neem oil, which is seen in this slide, the tree right here, this is the neem tree. It's still a broad spectrum insecticide, meaning that it kills all insects, even those that are beneficial. So I'm going to talk about how pest resistance develops, okay? I'm specifically talking about insecticide here. And we start at the top left, right, with an insect that's eating a plant. At this point, there may or may not be another insect that's a natural predator. We're not sure, right? So an insecticide is applied and it kills the pest. Any natural predator insect and any other beneficial insects. So a broad spectrum pesticide application at this point, or insecticide application, would kill everything, okay? The application, however, it doesn't kill all of the plant-eating insect. They may survive, and then they can be resistant. The resistant individuals are the ones who survive, all right? Those individuals then reproduce, okay? And now you have a bigger problem. And now when you apply the pesticide application, all of those pests will survive because they have passed on that resistant gene. There's now no natural predators because we remember if there were any, we killed them off in the first step. And so a second application, it's just not effective, and the new resistant population is now allowed to flourish. So this is called pesticide resistance, and it is a factor. With this in mind, we then turn to integrated pest management, and we want to follow those steps and discuss cultural approaches. So here's some cultural approaches. Rather than spraying and risking the possibility of insecticide resistance, maybe we can relocate the plant to a more appropriate location. We can use disease-resistant varieties. We can change the time of day when we water or the amount that we water. We can weed. We can mulch to prevent weeds and fertilize. Want to make sure our fertilizer applications are appropriate and correct. And then we can always make sure we're practicing proper pruning, okay? And this picture here is an example of drip irrigation, which is great because you don't get water on top of the leaves, so then you don't get the fungus. So the next step after cultural applications would be physical or mechanical approaches. Some examples of this would be hosing off aphids on roses, trapping insects with sticky traps, but beware, you don't want to trap your beneficial insects either. And like trapping slugs with traps, right? So there's your picture there. That's just, I think it's an orange peel, and they love those. So got to be there at the right time to catch them though. Some biological approaches, that's the next step. So we said cultural is first, then mechanical, and then biological. The first thing we need to do is overcome any negative emotions that spiders and wasps evoke, and we need to consider them absolutely a gift to your garden. We want to achieve an insect balance in the garden and support those beneficial insects. We should not use broad spectrum insecticides. We don't want to kill and trap them, and leave the leaves on the ground because that's actually where a lot of beneficial insects are able to reproduce. They put their eggs there and stuff like that. They get covered and they have shelter. So I've got some examples here. Everyone knows the classic, leave your ladybugs because they eat your aphids, right? Spiders eat way more insects and pests than ladybugs. So leave your spiders. And then wasps, there are so many beneficial wasps that we should leave and let go in our garden. For any other biological applications and for all chemical applications, I want you to follow these steps. Obtain a sample or a photo of the pest, which is either an insect or fungus, and then contact that Master Gardener Answer Clinic. The guidance that you're going to receive is specific to that particular pest on that particular plant, and will include the current recommendations as far as timing, when to apply something, are they resistant, and all that good information that you need. And that is the end of my presentation. Here are a lot of my resources I just want to review real quick. The Oregon State Extension is a plethora of information, as is the Washington State extension, okay, tons of publications there. You're just going to go crazy wild. My favorite being the Beneficial Insects publication. Integrated Pest Management Institute has some good information on that. National Resource Defense Council is where I got the information on how to combat weeds gently. Great courses. If you, through the library, you can watch these things called great courses, and they're very educational. And there's one called The Science of Gardening. If you have time to watch 25 episodes, all about 45 minutes each, it's very beneficial. Here's some tree care maintenance, how to prune things. That's where I got a lot of my pictures. Morton Arboretum actually had some shrub pictures, and then National Forest Gardening had some great pictures too. And then here are all the links: the soil test kit, instructions, friendsoftrees.org, get ship drop, and then the all-important email to the answer clinic. And then this is that YouTube video that you guys were able to see of me, but it's going to be clearer if you see it through YouTube. So, all right.